The other day, I realized that I've rated all of your Bloxburg builds and decided that today, I'm gonna rank all of my Bloxburg builds as a 10,000 subscriber special. Let's get right into it. As you guys can see here, I've made a tier list with a bunch of my best Bloxburg builds here. Some of them are like bad, like, I don't know, some of them like this one right here is like my starter house renovation. I mean, it wasn't bad, it's just like a tiny build, you know? So I have 5 different tiers here that we will be placing these builds into. We'll be rating these builds off of the wow factor. We'll be rating them on if they're outdated or not, and we'll be rating them on how unique they are. All right, let's get right into this. All right, so the first house that I have is my beach house from 2023. This build was super detailed. This backyard is one of my favorite backyards that I've ever made. I really love the custom windows, and I did have a reference photo for this build, and I think I nailed it on the spot. It's a fantastic build. Some of the interior rooms are really good, although I did hit the plot data limit, which meant that I couldn't decorate some of them to the level I would have liked. Either way though, I felt like the landscaping on this build was definitely one of my best, and I think I'm gonna put this in a high A tier. Alrighty, next up we have my fall mansion from this past fall here. This is a home that is based off a home in Michigan. This is a very massive mansion, and I love the exterior detailing on this build. It was a very expensive build, but the house looked very realistic. I mean, from all the angles that I have here, the landscaping was really good. The build itself looked incredible. Although the big knock on this build is the fact that it does not have an interior. So this exterior is S tier worthy and by far one of my best, but the fact that it does not have an interior, I think I'm going to put it towards the bottom of A tier. Next up, we have the house that I made for JoJo. Is this like suburban, like lakeside styled house? And I think this house looks incredible. I used the reference photo for this build, and I think I nailed this one on the spot as well. The interior was alright, although I was kind of limited by cash and all that stuff because JoJo didn't have too much money. But this was only $1.1 million, which actually turned out pretty good. I had this cool like custom jet ski thing in the back, which I thought was great. So in terms of wow factor, I think this exterior is a big wow factor. I mean, it was great. Definitely blows me away every time I see it. The jet ski design was pretty unique, and then it is pretty timeless. I mean, every time I look at this build, you know, it's like, I think it'll be good still in a year or two. I'd say this is about middle of the pack on A tier. Next up is the home that I made for my fan Eleanor. And now this home, she sent me an image in this backyard. I think I nailed it pretty much on the spot. I mean, it was very detailed exterior. The interior was not that good though, as there's a lot of custom walls, and I really struggled to make the interior, honestly. But I did love the exterior. Although due to the interior not being that great, I honestly might put this, you know what? I'm gonna put this at the bottom of A tier, and I'm gonna move that fall mansion down to B tier. Next up is my winter cabin that I just made this past winter, and now this build was incredible. We had the custom golf simulator and the man cave down there. We had so much good landscaping, and I think this build might be our first S tier. The custom roofing, the kitchen, there's so much detail in the interior and the exterior, and I think that's what makes this build an S tier build. Next up is my recent summer mansion that I just made. Now this build had about 4 good rooms on the interior, although the rest were kind of rushed, but I did like this interior a lot. I also really love the exterior, especially the backyard. The big knock that I have on this build though is how the entryway was and all the other rooms on the interior, because like I said, other than about 4 or 5 of the rooms, it really was not that good. So honestly, I think I'm gonna put this below the fall mansion in B tier. Next up is my starter house renovation. While I did accurately do the renovation of the starter house pretty well, I think I'm gonna have to put this down in like D tier, because I mean, it's just so tiny and it's really not that detailed. It's not that unique at all. There's so many starter house renovations out there, so I'm gonna have to put this down at D tier, and I could definitely see in a year it'll look outdated. Next up is my Bloxington mansion renovation that I did with Haley. Now, I think we nailed this build. I do not like the landscaping on this build, honestly. I mean, it's a very open yard, which yes, that's what we were going for, but like, if I had to actually, you know, showcase this build off, I really wouldn't have showcased the landscaping like I normally would on any other build. The roofing was pretty decent. The interior was kind of small. The detailing just was not there, I felt, on this build. It was not as like much of a wow factor whenever you see it as any of my other builds were. So for that, I'm gonna put it down at C. Next up is this beach house that I made with Haley, and while I absolutely love this beach house, I feel like there's so many people out there that have made beach houses, and that's definitely what's holding this build back. But if you do look at it, it was very detailed. We had a very good shoreline, very good landscaping, very good interior like the kitchen, although it's definitely held back by the fact that so many people have made beach houses, so I think I'm going to put this at the bottom of C tier. Next up is this modern farmhouse that I made, and you guys will be seeing this here very soon. This build is actually really good. I really love this build. The interior is really good. This is actually my best interior yet, and I thought I nailed this build, although the exterior definitely lacked the detailing that I normally have. I was using a reference photo, and so I kind of stuck to that reference photo a little bit too much, and that definitely hurt me as the landscaping was not that great, and the detailing on the exterior as a whole was not that good. So I'm gonna put this at the bottom of B tier. Next up is my Pinterest home recreation, and I think I nailed this build. This build was absolutely incredible. There's some really good rooms here in the interior, and I actually really liked it. The landscaping also is very, very good, and so I'm thinking I'm gonna put this right in front of the modern farmhouse. Next up is my cozy cottage renovation that you guys will see soon. Make sure you guys stay tuned for that. It looks really, really good. So I'm just gonna show you guys the exterior though. It's the same thing as the starter house, very small build, and it's not that unique. So I'm gonna be putting it down in D tier, right in front of the starter house. Next up is my mansion inside of a mountain build, and now I think this build is incredible. It was very unique. I'd never seen anybody do something like this in Bloxburg before this build. This was super, super good. The landscaping on it, beautiful. The interior, beautiful. This build was one of my best by far, and due to the wow factor and how unique it was, this is definitely an A tier build. We're gonna put it down at the bottom of A tier. I think it was just that good. Next up is my colonial lake house, and now this build had incredible landscaping, incredible views, especially from the interior. All the rooms were very well thought out as to how they wanted the landscaping to look, and I think it was amazing. I'm gonna be putting this at the bottom of S tier for now. Next up is my fall mansion, and now this build is very special because this build was built without the transform tool. So this entire roof was made with structurals, which is very, very tough to do. This was made all the way back in the fall of 2022. Very, very difficult build, but it came out beautiful. As you guys can see, the landscaping on this build was incredible. The interior was incredible. This is one of the best builds I think I've ever made. Actually, you know what? I think this is the best build I've ever made. Nobody until I made this build had done a build like this where you use the roofs with all the structurals and stuff. I was one of the first people to do that. And for that reason, this is going at the top of S tier. Best build I've ever made. Next up is my Lake Tahoe mansion, and while I absolutely love this build, the interior on this build was horrendous. This is by far one of my worst interiors ever, and it's definitely holding this build back. The exterior was great. I loved the front yard, although the backyard definitely could use some work, and on the sides. So for that reason, I'm gonna be putting this down in the middle of B tier. Next up is my beach city. I made this back in the summer of 2022, and I actually think that this build was really good. I liked it a lot. It had some great detailing, great power lines, although I didn't really make use of space very well as I felt like the ocean was just a bit too big and I could have had more buildings. And for that reason, I'm going to be putting this at the bottom of B tier. Next up is my Chicago in the 1980s build, and now this build was built a very, very long time ago. I believe this was made all the way back in May of 2021, guys. This was made 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Very timeless still to this day. This is going to be going in the bottom of S tier as it's very detailed, very timeless. I absolutely love this build. Next up is my Louvre Museum build, and while the detailing on this was great, I personally think it didn't turn out that well. So I'm going to be putting this at the front of C tier because it only had 2 sides as well. The Louvre Museum actually has 3 sides, but due to plot data it only had 2 sides. Wasn't even a finished build. That's going in C tier. After that is my colonial farmhouse, and while I absolutely love this farmhouse, the landscaping on it was great, the interior was alright, it was pretty detailed, but it just didn't make a lot of sense. And so for that reason, that's going to be going right in front of the Louvre Museum in C tier, despite it being a pretty decent build. And last but not least is my mid-century modern home. Now this mid-century modern home had the best landscaping I think I've ever made. It was a very, very good landscaping, and this was whenever I first discovered I had landscaping talent. Although the problem is I really hate the border trees that I did around the plot. Like, I don't get why I did that. I should have just left the landscaping open. And then the interior on this build was not that great either. The backyard was pretty meh. And so for that reason, I'm going to be putting this build at the bottom of C tier, and then I'm going to move the beach house down to D tier. Well, that was me ranking all of my Bloxburg builds. Let me know which one was your favorite and if you would readjust it in any way down in the comments below. But with that, I'm signing off for now. I'll see you guys in my next video. Goodbye, everybody.